I'd really like to hear most initially from the class of 75 women who are here. And
both of us.
Yeah, both of you. And that, well, it's a representative sample. I know it's not, you're not speaking for everyone, but what brought me to that question was that I think each of our classes has this different perspective of Kirkland in its trajectory. Like, I think our class, I was 76, so both of us kind of felt as though it had been there forever and was going to be there forever, whereas the classes of 72 and 73 may have, and the Kate's class would have felt very differently, and Pam as well. So anyway, so yeah, just where Kirkland felt to you, what it felt like to be at Kirkland. And so I'll
it's interesting. I had this exact conversation recently because our class was just informed of a classmate's passing, a Hamilton classmate's passing. And it was interesting because we sent it out on the class listserv, and so many people weighed in and with different either remembrances of him or just remembrances, or talking about how much the class meant to them and how nice it was to be able to reconnect in that way. And one of the things I said on that was that I felt that our class, and we are a class that for as long as I know has always chosen to identify as Hamilton and Kirkland class of 75. We don't see ourselves as Hamilton 75 and Kirkland 75. And we have organized our structure and everything as a joint class, and we do our reunions together. And I was saying, I really think that part of that was we were in that very sweet spot of a lot of the growing pains had been worked out from the early years, where I think it was a complete culture shock for Hamilton to have all these Kirkland women. And then towards the end of Kirkland's existence, I think, we were in the fight for our life. And that really colored things. But right there in the middle, and maybe this is true of 76 too, I don't know, but certainly 75, we felt like we had a pretty set situation that was really positive, really a lot of appreciation then and now for what each institution brought to the Hill and their value. I don't know. Tammy might have a very different opinion. I don't know, but that was my perspective then and now.
No, I totally agree with you, because my feeling, and I've also had conversations about this in the more recent years when we've had reunions or panel discussions or whatever it is, we did hit the sweet spot. I mean, we had some of the pioneer spirit, but we weren't quite. I don't know if I would have come to a campus that was full of mud and where there were only 100 students or whatever it was. I also would not have gone to the school if it hadn't been co-ed, but it wasn't really co-ed. And I think I didn't really have a true understanding of what that meant. I think for the Hamilton students that came to Hamilton, they were much straighter. There was a different sensibility. And what it meant was that, but on the other hand, the Hamilton students who came when all the Kirkland students were there already knew what they were getting into. So it wasn't, they were different from the Hamilton students in the earlier classes, where not only were there women, they were not the kind of women they expected, and there were still those jaunts to other colleges for, women's.
Girls.
What were they called?
I think they're called truck rolls.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Well-
Casanova. There were just some schools.
Wells College.
Wells, yeah. So they would go to women's colleges, and it was. And then I remember once going to a dance, and it was Hamilton students, and I guess the women from Wells or whatever school, women's school it was, and there was some fast rock music playing. And they were all, it was like towards the end of the night, and they're somehow dancing real slow to it because they just, it was like, let me, they had a different approach. But anyway, back to the Kirkland, the idea of the Kirkland Hamilton situation. When we were there, we didn't have any overt hostility to being there. We just, and you're right, I never thought about the dissolution, the Kirkland being absorbed or vanishing or anything like that. And in fact, I was in law school when it started happening. I was getting letters, but I couldn't focus on it. So the battle wasn't mine. And I retained this very positive outlook towards Kirkland, and also without a sense of alienation from Hamilton students. And I guess I did.
We didn't. No, I mean, later on, we felt the disunity came with the administration. We didn't lack unity, the HK unity. I mean, the guys were every guy I knew was as appalled and horrified, by the announcement in chapel that we were done. I mean, it was stunning. So that disunity that hostility was strictly through the administrations. It was the grown-ups who were screwing it up.
Yeah, I mean, it was, there were still different types of Hamilton students. And I guess, okay, so I was an anthropology minor, right? And so when I encountered some of the really straight, conservative Hamilton types, I viewed it as an interesting cultural experience to get to know them. It'd be like, oh, let me see what this guy has to say. Like, I viewed it as, I wouldn't say a learning experience, but it was a different thing. So I wasn't really put off by it. And there were enough other guys who I felt I could relate to. I mean, it was a little bit more pick and choose, and like which ones had long hair and beards or whatever. But that it was still, the school worked for what, and I think it strongly, Jean, as to what your comment about how it affected your life, it shaped and set me on whatever path it was. It was a big change. It was more, it's funny. My husband will talk about like, oh, high school, and it was the greatest time of my life. I'm like, high school? Are you kidding?
Too bad.
Prom. We wouldn't go to the prom. That was like, they canceled the prom at my high school because nobody, like 8 people signed up or something. And then there was Kirkland and Hamilton, but it was Kirkland. So it huge impact on my life.
But also the times were like that too. And
Yes.
I'm the class rep for my New York school before boarding school. And there's a huge problem with fundraising in for the 70s classes, period. And so the prom was the kind of symbolic of that whole thing. We called it bomb the prom. Like, prom, are you kidding? Really? So,
well, I'm wondering also to that point, and I was supposed to be in the class of 75. I took a year off, but it seemed to me that the class of 7, because of the times we were in, the class of 75 seemed hipper than the class of 76. There seemed to be more long hair, more beards, and it was more of that 70s, early 70s gestalt. And I don't know if you feel that way or not, but that that may have given a cohesiveness to your class that I didn't really feel in the class of 76 so much.
Interesting. I mean, I do remember when, and I don't remember what year it was, but I remember towards the end of my time at Kirkland, so might have been junior year, might have been senior year, I think maybe junior year. We were talk sometimes about how it seemed like a lot of the younger class women, I mean, you know, who were underclassmen, yes, that they were preppier, as we put it, and they seemed to be a little bit of a different mindset and different way of dress than, no, not dramatically, but you could kind of see it starting to turn a bit. And I think it was a societal turn. But I also think, I didn't, you know, getting back to Kirkland being in trouble and about to close and closing, I was a grad student at Cornell at the time, so I wasn't far away, but I knew nothing about this. And I think I got a letter forwarded from my mom, because I probably, Kirkland only had my mom's address. And it was about how, you know, for the 78 graduation, they wanted everyone to show up to protest because, you know, there was this effort by Hamilton to take over Kirkland. And I was like, oh my God, that's outrageous. We've got to fight. We've got to stop it. Little did I know it was over. But I drove up from Ithaca, put on my armband, and I have pictures if that was your graduation, Pam. I was there. And I was like, okay, now what do we do? Who do we write to? And of course, you know, this was before anything other than, you know, a typewritten letter. And it was all way too late. But then when I read Sam's book, it just devastated me and saw how long it had been going on and how nasty it was. And the part about the anti-Jewish stuff just made me sick.
What was that?
One of the big problems, and I'm forgetting now who I think it was the head of the board of trustees, but I can't remember. I have to go back to Sam's book. But basically, one of the things that Hamilton didn't like was the fact that Kirkland was attracting a whole lot of Jewish students. And
so you're talking about a small group of Hamilton. Hamilton was very divided, but I want to bring it back to the class of 75, which precedes all this stuff.
Yes,
so,
it does. Lovely.
Yeah, but you've taken it on. But notice how you've taken it on. You're the class of 75, but you still had that very emotional and intellectually correct response to what was going on because it was your school.
Was you prejudiced against Jewish people on campus at the time, do you think? Because I know that for my cousin in the charter class, she did feel that.
Really?
Yeah.
I remember my mother looking at I don't know, it was whatever the brochure was from Hamilton, and she looked at the list of names and counted it and said, isn't that interesting? The Jewish names come out to be about 15%. You know, it was like this really clear number. So my mother spotted that. I didn't think about it, didn't worry about it, but I understood it was probably there, but it's true it didn't. I don't think it affected the students, and it wasn't something that it wasn't like there was something I wanted out of Hamilton that I wasn't going to get because I was Jewish. I didn't want to, I didn't know any better. Also, I didn't know things about connections and how things work and how you get ahead. I didn't want to get ahead. I didn't, just wasn't a concern at the time.
I think it was again, the adults
Yeah.
and not the students who had those issues.
We know
I
who
just,
was
I just am
dating
aware of it because my
everybody.
cousin was dating a Jewish man.
I only
and
dated Jewish men.
yeah. So
Well,
it
you
came
know-
up occasionally. It was like, what? He's Jewish or whatever.
What
Um,
I grew up in a community right outside New York City, Westchester County, and it was heavily Jewish. I was not Jewish, and and then I got to Kirkland and it felt the same way, I guess. And
I grew up in New
ironically,
York.
Now the community I live in is very much the same way. So I think I didn't notice anybody being discriminated
Yeah.
against, and it just
Never.
all felt normal to me.
Right.
But
That's certainly how it felt to me in 79 as well, for sure.
Never.
But I was just wondering if there was a bit of a change there over those 10 years, really.
No, I think it would, if anything, maybe it was some sort of admissions decision type thing, but I don't think it filtered down in any way. And it was nothing I ever felt. And I'm Jewish.
Yeah.
So.
I don't think it would even have been in the administration in any way. I think that there were groups of conservative Hamilton faculty. Well, I know that the Hamilton faculty was divided. And so I don't think they represented the whole school at any time.
What you noticed was the sexism before you noticed the anti-Semitism against the women. And it was the most bizarre experience of my life, I guess, because I had gone to girls' schools my entire life, which I don't even, I mean, to me, I always treasured it. The joke in my family is for Pam, only marriage is co-ed. I mean, the rest of my life, I mean, I just loved that. I mean, it was normal. It was like primary nature to me. It was like a non-thing. But the thing when I noticed it, when I connected the dots on this really, really bizarre experience I was having with a professor, I didn't even realize I was experiencing sexism. And
Right.
And I've probably told this story before to some people, but whenever I think about my decision to come to Kirkland, I think of this one story, and I think it's so relevant to who we were as young women at that age in that particular time. And my parents liked to do a college tour with all their kids, and I was the fourth girl, so it was the fourth big college tour, and we're going all around and looking at different places. And I'd heard about Kirkland and wanted to go there. And this was probably the summer, I'm sure it was the summer before my senior year, so this would have been in high school, would have been the summer of 70, because I graduated from high school in 71.
71, yeah.
Yeah. So at that time, the Kirkland admissions office was a barracks-like building on the Hamilton campus, right kind of near where Commons is. I think it had a tin roof. It was, one level and a little bit long and very narrow. Which was not like any college admissions office I had seen to that date or still. I walked in, it was pouring rain that day, and the sound on the tin roof was thunderous. And then there was this big open room where you waited for your interview, and there was a fire going, which was a lovely touch because it was a cold summer day. And in front of the fireplace was this gigantic St. Bernard who was soaking wet and dripping and stinking of wet dog. And I thought, I love this place. It was just like so much the anti-establishment, I guess I would call it, which was the word we used all the time. And it was like, it gave a big kind of FU to tradition and the way things are supposed to be and the way you're supposed to act. And And then I had my interview, which I don't really remember much about. And then they took me on a tour. And I'm walking over, and there used to be a wooden staircase between the side entrance of like there's a door, or it used to be a door outside of the McEwen dining hall, but on the second level.
Yeah, and it went across, right? It went across
Yes,
to
and
List.
it went across to List, I guess it was.
I think it did. Yeah, that sounds right.
And I believe it was bright yellow, or could have been
Yep.
orange or red. I don't know. And I just looked at that, and it was just, again, it was just like nothing I had seen before. And it just seemed to me that there were no rules. That it was just so countercultural in a way, that there was so much possibility, that you didn't have to be weighed down by, this collegiate tradition. And I just loved it. And that moment, I had a huge fight with my parents. They didn't want me to go there. The only
Sounds familiar.
reason they finally caved is because they thought Hamilton's there. Hamilton's kind of like in the mix. If all else fails, it's Hamilton, and it got a good reputation and a long history. Let Carolyn go off, and they called me Carol, as we all did back in the day. But let Carol do what she wants to do, and somehow it would be safe. Which, I guess there was something to that. And I, like Tammy, I wouldn't have gone there if it was all women. Because, only in that little hill of a academic place, because I was interested in a Coed environment. But I loved the idea that we could set our own way of doing things and have our own rules, and that women controlled that. But I just liked having the guys around because I wanted to go out and have a good time. Kirkland was it. I loved it the moment I saw it. I still love it today. I just think the world missed out, and a lot of students missed out on all sorts of wonderful things, that it couldn't continue.
Well, I arrived in a snowstorm, and I knew it was for me. I loved it. Interviews in a snowstorm. This is great. It's like you and the St. Bernard.
I interviewed actually in New York. They did, I guess I had gone to a few schools. My mother figured out some places I should go and, look at. And later on, when she would get literature from Kirkland saying, discover yourself and, what kind of woman are, and she would go, I thought I was sending you to Hamilton, this was a shock. She's like, and then how are you going to put a roof over your head? You're going to have to marry a stockbroker. That was her view, that it was too impractical.
I'd never heard of Hamilton. My mother went to William Smith when it was William Smith, in the 40s, and I never heard of Hamilton. So, my mother had, but I'd never heard of it.
Well, my mother was a substitute teacher in Queens. So what she would do is she would talk to these guidance counselors and come up with different ideas. And I had sort of totally switched gears. The summer before my senior year of high school, I had gone to a National Science Foundation program at University of Bridgeport. Before I did that, I thought, I lived in New York City, or I lived in Queens, but
New York.
Yeah, I've always been in a city. I want something that's, like was going to look at Tufts. I can't remember the other things, but like large schools near cities. I was in Bridgeport for a summer, and I went, no way. Like, there's no trees. We were limited in terms of where we could go. And that's how I ended up looking at small rural colleges. But I didn't have any concept of, I want experimental schools. Because I'm thinking if I had that vision, I would have looked at Hampshire and Andover, and there's a whole bunch, but I was very haphazard, and it somehow ended up interviewing at Kirkland. And then I only went up to the campus after I was accepted. Joanne, do you guys remember Joanne Rappaport? Because we're from the same town. So we went up together. And it was just like this really cool place. And we must have stayed with students or something in the dorms. I don't have a clear recollection of that, but I remember the rock. And just, I don't know, it just felt really good, but not, and I didn't really focus on the disparity of the type of education of Hamilton. But when I came up, I made this decision that I would take a course each semester. I would take one course at Hamilton so that I would continue to remember what it was like to be in a school with grades, or to remember what the process was, since that was what most of the world was. And my first year, I had been very kind of science oriented. So I took biology, and it was in the big lecture hall, and it was all the pre-meds. And after that, I didn't take another science course. Let's just put it that way. But
that's where I met one of my best guy friends. Mike Galvin was in the science building. That's where I used to study, because the library was so social and so noisy. So I used to go to the science building.
Yeah, I remember I have so many wonderful memories. Like I remember the old library and being in the stacks. And I remember my first semester, I took some course called Good and Evil. And then we had to write a term paper. And I was always like terrified of writing papers. But what I picked to do was the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which at the time, it wasn't like a serious book. Like now, I think that would be fine and nobody would raise their eyebrows about it. But it was the kind of choice that I feel, if it had been Hamilton, like it wouldn't have been serious literature, so you wouldn't have done that. But at Kirkland, I was able to, and I had all these index cards, and I don't
was
remember.
it a literature class or like a religion class with Jay Williams, who was phenomenal?
No, I did that Jay Williams course the next year. No, it was a professor who wasn't there. I guess he was only there that first year. And it was something called Good and Evil. I guess it was a philosophy course or something. So it wasn't literature. But my memory of that is being in the stacks of the library, and you could hear everything. And I remember somebody telling some really detailed story about, I don't know if it was a date, a boyfriend, whatever it was. And then they getting to the moment of whatever the crisis, the climax. And then I guess they realized, they were like, oh, we better talk about this somewhere else. And it was like, damn, where's the end of that story? And it was
that old library was beautiful.
It really was. I know.
Did they tear it down? Did they tear it down?
No, they repurposed it. I mean, I remember
It's a museum now, I think.
It was a museum.
Where is it?
Okay, so it was where Commons is, and you went up like one or two buildings up from Commons, and you entered it not from the side that would be closer to the path from Kirkland. You entered it from
near Dunham, kind of.
No, the next quad over. The next.
It became the gallery for a while,
right?
So they built the Willen.
Right, exactly. So I remember going to it. There was some reunion where they did the first time they had a Kirkland art exhibit. They did it there.
We had an all Kirkland reunion art exhibition there. Yes.
Right.
And I think it was Emerson. That's coming to mind?
That might be.
Yeah. Emerson Library. I think that was it.
Yeah.
And the new library, as I still call it, the one that is at the far end of the quad, that I believe opened spring semester of our freshman year. Either that or it's the beginning of our sophomore.
I think it was the beginning of the next year, because I kind of remember a whole year, but I don't know.
They must have built a new library very quickly, because I arrived in the fall of 75. And the new library was there, the Burke.
Oh, yeah, it was already old by then. It was like 3 or 4 years, 3 years old, I guess.
So
It's
did
a
you,
They
bigger
had
in
the
size.
all-night
Was
reading room, which was something I'd never heard of before, and it seemed like other people hadn't either. Now I think that's pretty routine.
What
what
is it?
was it? Reading room?
All-night reading room, that
Oh,
room,
right.
if you're looking at the library from the front, there's a room on the far right side.
Yes, yes.
It had a metal grate that came down when the library closed. And if you wanted to keep studying, you had to go into that all-night room.
Did you
Did
guys
you
have
go
the,
there?
did you have escorts? We had Hamilton guys escorting us back to campus because there had been a rape at Princeton. Princeton woman had been raped, and so it was a really nice way just to get to know some of the guys you would never normally meet, never nice enough, but to come back from the library late at night, which is why I'm mentioning it. I
That's
guess I didn't know.
nice.
I don't think we
It was
had
nice.
that, but I think
Look how dark it
various
was
sexual
between there.
assault instances of different types were
Yeah,
rampant and not dealt
Yeah.
with and not taught about, and that's a whole nother topic maybe for another
Yeah.
call. But I do, in my junior year, there was what I believe was a outside person from outside the Hamilton Kirkland community who got into North Dorm. There were no locks, of course, and I was living there at the time, which is another topic, how we were the first year to have Coed dorms.
Right, that's right.
And
By
I
floor?
lived
By floor?
my sophomore year in Carnegie, which was a wonderful experience. Carnegie is such a cool dorm. And my junior
fireplaces.
year, I
Right.
lived in North. And then I went back to Kirkland for my senior year. But when I was living in North, a guy came in and went up to the 3rd or 4th floor. North was co-ed by floor, and I think it was 2nd and 4th floors were women. So it was probably the 4th floor because I was on the 2nd. And they were communal bathrooms in the middle of the hallway. So you had to leave your room to go to the bathroom, and she was coming out of the shower. And of course, she'd left her door unlocked. And when she walked in, there's this stranger there, a man.
I had that too.
And she started screaming. And I was in my room with a guy, and he heard it, and he went running out in his sock feet. I think it was March, but it was, of course, snowy. And then a couple of other guys heard the commotion and came running out, and they went tearing across the quad after this guy and tackled him.
That's
somewhere,
great.
like,
What a
on
story.
the far edge of
Jesus.
Carnegie, I think, back edge of Carnegie. And he went through this whole story about how they had been friends and at home, and he had come up to visit, and he should have given her warning, and he's really so apologetic, and he meant no harm, and he thinks she just freaked out because she wasn't expecting him. And they didn't know. I mean, none of us knew anything about this kind of stuff back then. And they finally let him go. And then they got back to the dorm, and she's hysterically crying, and a bunch of us women were around her. And when they said, was he your friend back home? And she's like, no, I've never seen her before in my life. And by that time, someone had the wherewithal to call campus security. And they came and looked for him and never found him. So
I had a naked guy on my bed coming back from spring break. Okay, and I will spare you the details. And I just looked at him and I called him by name and I said, I'm leaving, and when I come back, you're going to be gone.
so you knew him.
But I knew him, and he was friends, like he was frat brothers, not friends. He was in this frat where I had several, still friends with the TDX, right? And it was bizarre. And you got to love it. 30 years later, I ran into him in front of my apartment building in New York City. Something about me and strange bullets, I guess. But there's nowhere to go with that. You know, it was just kind of weird and, you know, horrible.
And Julie Weinstein, who couldn't be on tonight, but she's also 75, and she and I have talked a lot about this issue. And is it different today? I mean, yes, there's more of a vocabulary, certainly. And there are procedures now at almost at every college, I'm sure. But from talking to her daughter, who is a little younger than my daughter's, her daughter's perspective was it was no different, really, in terms of being able to address issues of rape or date rape, you know, unconsensual behavior.
Bullying, just bullying in general.
Yeah.
But so did you feel unsafe at Kirkland?
I felt totally safe. I felt totally safe. And I think if I ever got I got myself in some situations where it was kind of like, why am I with this guy? But it was, like, it wasn't like, I could have walked out the door, you know what I mean? It was just something, I never felt, I didn't feel unsafe. I felt very safe. It gave me a very secure feeling, and the unlocked doors and all. I mean, that was actually one of the things that was so wonderful about Kirkland.
I had one very bad experience, which I think I talked about a bit on the Kirkland Facebook group. But I would say 99, with the people I knew, every other situation I was in, I felt very safe. I felt, without us knowing what consent was at that time, everyone respected it except one. In terms of the campus, I think what shook us so much about this incident my junior year is that we couldn't believe that someone from outside the Hamilton Kirkland community would come on the campus and, try to attack someone. It seemed like such a little idyllic place. I did get worried sometimes if it was really late at night. And I remember sometimes scurrying up that pathway because we didn't have that bridge thing they have now, but scurrying up the road back to Kirkland. Sometimes I would walk a little faster, but it would be like 2 a.m. and I was alone and nothing ever happened.
I never had that feeling. And I would, one of the things I love
me and being anxious about stuff like that.
It just never occurred to me.
You grew up in Queens. I grew up in Manhattan. Okay. It's like you're attuned to city life and how to walk and protect yourself and what not to do in the subway and all that sidewalk lane, all that stuff. And in the 70s, New York was bankrupt and it was really scary. You go to a place like Kirkland or Hamilton, you think you've died and gone to heaven practically.
It felt very safe. And one of my favorite things was when there was a snowstorm, I would go and take a walk at midnight or 2 a.m. or whatever, and go into route to Kirkland Glen. And
amazing. I know.
Never ever had any fear of anything. And even and I'm thinking the consent stuff you're saying, I guess it just never, I guess I was lucky. I never felt anything where I was afraid that somebody wouldn't respect if I said no or if I left. And I never had any problems like that. I never
had any problems except that one. And that really did cause me to think about those issues. Not so much at the time even, but in the years past. Actually, the Kavanaugh hearing was what really triggered me. It was like all of a sudden I felt like I'm back there.
Wow.
It was, I do think that we weren't as aware of the vulnerabilities of women. We weren't as aware of date rape. We weren't even aware that, I don't think we were even aware that there was such a thing as date rape.
Right, exactly.
And that
I
if we
certainly
got
was.
ourselves in a bad situation, Tammy, it was our fault, not theirs.
Yeah, you might be right. I might totally think it was something that I put myself into the situation.
Yeah.
We were told that,
totally-
what were you doing walking out at night if a woman shouldn't be in this, that, or the other situation.
Yeah. Plus it was the age of Aquarius, we were all, love was in the air, but we didn't think really of.
But I think in a small
were
school
threatened.
also, we were aware of who the Casanovas were, and we used to laugh about these guys,
But
who
the men were,
imagined themselves.
Sometimes
at
it took you
some
by
ladies'
surprise. I will say that someone you knew
Right.
had no reason to suspect there would ever be an issue, and suddenly there is an issue, and you're like, nothing in my life prepared me for this. I've been drunk with frat guys and making out with them and said no, and they not a problem.
And they said, yeah, and then it was like, fine, even if you said, what did I make out?
Totally. And then you can have a calm conversation with someone you know and think is a friend, and all of a sudden you're fighting for your life. I mean,
But I think that a lot of the guys I knew when I was friends with, just in my general circles, they also struggled with, the ambiguities of dating and how you do that, and being in a small school, just put everything under a microscope, which is something I do not miss about, that.
did you find that Hamilton men or men in general at the time were protective? Because I certainly did. But my friends would, say, I don't want you to walk across campus alone, or let me get you a taxi. Don't take the subway home, after when we were in New York.
I never felt that. I don't think.
I had several Hamilton friends who insisted on making sure that I got home.
From the Hamilton
70,
campus?
in 78, 9.
I mean, after college or in
After college, but also at college.
I don't remember.
At college, I never felt, I don't think anyone ever, I didn't think about it. So it wasn't like or if you left someone's room or something, or dorm, you wouldn't, I just didn't worry about getting from one side of campus to the other.
What about fraternities, going to fraternity parties? Just
never
walking
had-
on campus from class to class is different than going
I
to a
wouldn't
No,
go
I
alone
I had
to a
no
fraternity
problem
party.
with fraternity parties. And
Me neither.
I mean, I know there were legitimate problems that some Kirkland women had. I don't discount those, but that was never my experience.
I didn't have any problem at fraternity parties either, but I did on one occasion lose my heel walking back from, I think it was Deke. And so I took my shoes off, and I realized that was a really big mistake, that actually walking across the whole campus without your shoes on was, potentially a really unhealthy thing to do. And one time
That was
we
freezing.
came across a woman who had fallen into a snowbank on the hill. We actually heard, I was walking with a group of people, and we actually heard her say,
Wow.
help. She was stuck in a snowbank.
Oh my God.
So I think, that was actually quite dangerous. She had just fallen in and couldn't get out. So
One
who's the
time-
thing that you discovered?
I
they're walking
I
across?
don't know that I want this on film for posterity, but here we go. I was at a party at the Griffin Apartments, I think. The ones that
Griffin
were
Road.
up across the golf course,
Griffin Road, yeah.
maybe senior year. And I remember walking home, and from a variety of substances that I'd ingested that night, probably, I decided midway across the golf course that I really needed to take a nap. And so
Oh
I
my
lay
God.
down and I woke up cold several hours later. But
Wow.
if anyone
God.
passed me by, I don't know, but I was perfectly safe, and I just got up and went back to my dorm.
Wow.
Could have
Do
gotten
that some places.
You could have died of exposure. I'm just a mother. So.
No, it was late in the year.
Oh,
All right, I
good.
have a question. Did everyone swim in the reservoir in the spring? Or do you remember that first day of spring when everyone all of
Yes.
them was smiling? It was like, oh my God, I realized people didn't smile all winter almost. It was
And
so
naked and
cold.
totally white, skinny dipping. Everyone, I didn't do it. But that's what they were doing.
And
I
Sig
did it
usually
once.
had a band on one of the very first warm spring days outside, and a lot of the women would be wearing spring dresses and it dancing, and it just felt so light and happy.
I remember a lot of nudity on campus also. Like one day I walked into McEwen and there were 3 people who had clearly ingested some hallucinogenic substances who were stark naked climbing on the rock and the swing.
Wow.
Why do I?
I never
you?
saw that, but
Well, during our orientation with our bodies ourselves, there were people taking off their underwear and, discovering that they had a vagina
at orientation,
as a third orifice down there for the first time in their lives. Like, oh yeah.
wow.
That's literally what they had mirrors for us.
Wow.
Oh, at
I've
orientation?
heard that some classes got our bodies ourselves as an orientation
copies.
thing. And I've heard that some classes got plant from an upper class, but 75, I don't think we got any of those.
It
We
was
got
the
a
era of streaking too, wasn't it? Isn't that when
Streaking,
people were
yeah.
streaking?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that did happen a few times, but it didn't really register as a big deal to me, I guess.
We thought it was funny. I don't know.
Yeah,
Take
was
it
funny.
seriously, like whatever. Okay.
So,
Whatever floats your boat.
Libby, I don't think I know you're on mute, but I don't want you to be left out of the conversation if you want to join.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Elizabeth here. I didn't know that.
I
Hello,
came
Elizabeth.
late. I just got out of class about 15 minutes ago, and
I'm so glad you've joined us again.
oh man, I thought I was never going to get out of that class. We're so tiny here that I have seminars at my house. But unfortunately, what that means is if somebody forgets something and comes back like 2 minutes later, you're there helping them search their backpack for like 15 minutes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Although I do remember seminars, I took obviously every Asian history class there was, and Ed Lee had all of the advanced seminars on each Asian country at his house in the evening, and he would serve food and drinks.
Who was teaching it? Who
Asian
taught it?
Ed Lee?
Yes.
Asian Ed.
Yeah. And he
Well, that's sort of special. Did you think that was special?
I did. I mean, he was a very prim, controlled elderly gentleman even then, but it was quite lovely. And he lived right near where I guess like the alumni relations building is now. And it was very easy to get to. And yeah, we just sat around. They were usually like 8-10 people at the most, and talking about whatever book we read. We had to read a book every week, which was a little over the top because if you're taking 5 courses like that, and
Sure.
anyway, but they were lovely. They were really, and you felt grown up. and important. I
A
love
lot of the faculty had entertained and formed relationships with students, didn't they? I mean, they certainly did in my class.
yes.
Um,
Although I've heard about relationships that were not appropriate, but those were of a different type, I guess.
That was also at the time. I don't know. My high school was the same, so the teachers were young, and the teacher-student relationships lines got blurred in those days, where they would totally not be acceptable now.
I hope you didn't go to Horace Mann.
No, but I think that was also, it was a function of the times, of the transition from conservative 50s, well, I would call that conservative, to 60s, and then sort of normalized in the 70s, I guess. Does anybody agree with me? I mean, do you have a sense?
Oh, it
of
was
that?
creepy.
It was normal.
Like,
It was normal.
creepy. It was
It was-
creepy,
It
though.
wasn't normal.
What was
Yeah.
creepy? What was creepy to you? What was creepy?
So you talked about
Professors.
high school, Kate, right? So, I mean, I can remember seeing my friend Blythe sashay. She was very French and ultimately married Richard Holbrooke, the ambassador of France, but sashaying sort of up the hallway, and the football coach picking his nose and watching her sweat. Like, that's just creepy. It's creepy. And I think I carried that sense of the creepiness with me to Kirkland, although my advisor had full permission from his department chair to date students. Had the sense to ask about it, right, and was given that permission on the grounds that there was no one else to date, and therefore no one on the Hill else to date, and therefore it was going to be necessary to
What
for a full
department?
to have a full
Yes.
life. I can't. But he did apply for basically permission to do that, which suggests, right, that there was some kind of awareness.
This is Kirkland you're talking about?
This
or
was
high
at
school?
Kirkland, yeah. There was some kind of awareness that it might not be okay,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think there was that awareness. But I also, again, from the Kirkland Facebook group, I've heard people tell stories sometimes about particular faculty members who I gather were notorious, although I was oblivious to that. But also how once there was a fire drill, I think Millbank or something, in the middle of the night, everyone's coming out of the dorm, including this Kirkland student, together with this professor.
Oh my God.
And people, the fact that it was being talked about on a Facebook group not long ago makes you think, yeah, people all were scandalized. So they knew it wasn't like what you would typically be doing. But
I wonder if
people
someone
in the-
pulled the fire alarm because I wonder if someone pulled the fire alarm to out him.
But the people in
Probably
the
not.
person's suite must have known,
Mhm.
it's not very, and presumably he had to go to the bathroom at some point, anyway.
To my knowledge of other campuses and other, in those times, that was not unique or unusual.
Yeah.
Even.
I think my context thought that was creepy. There was someone that everybody talked about who dated women, and everybody I knew thought it was creepy. But
Well, I mean, I've taught high school for 40 years, 11th and 12th grade, English, and it's what the kids which, even though that's younger, they're younger or not, because now, I think they're much more precocious than at least I was, or I don't know if we all were, but they call it the creepy adult thing. Like, there's the weird adult thing, and there's a line that you can't cross as an adult, as the teacher, like they want you to be safe. So there's, you want to connect with them, but they're also very aware of when it gets weird.
Yeah, and I think it's actually that the students are generally, not always, but generally attempting to be a favorite or have a crush on the teacher. It's often the teacher who's got to, be careful because the student is draping themselves all over them, or, is showing up at their door, or, so it's not always the teacher that's being inappropriate. It's the teacher that is responsible.
You're saying that student is being obnoxious in a sense. It's a display as opposed to being discreet.
But I think in our generation, as far as I knew, although I thought it was wrong and I didn't do it, I think there wasn't much more than there is today, a general sense of anything goes. I mean, if I had known at the time that a student was dating a professor, or that he was dating a bunch of women, I probably would have thought, "Ew, that's kind of creepy," but oh well, whatever, have fun. I would not have thought, we got to put a stop to this, because I think I would have thought that was uncool.
Yeah, that's.
And I got to college and realized how out of it I was and how unaware, just like I was unaware when I was being sexually harassed by this one professor. And I'm not giving you all the context on that or how I realized that was what it was, but I became aware of what a mental bubble, or how sheltered, I'd been. And, I don't think
I think a lot of us were like that because, I think, I can't remember anything specific, but I think if a professor came on to me, I kind of wouldn't even know, I wouldn't have even been aware that they were doing it. Like, oh, they want me to have dinner with them. Isn't that nice?
Right.
Like, it just wouldn't occur to me.
You had trusted adults.
Yeah,
and there was a lot of dinner and conversations going on that were totally not
they were fine. Right.
Yeah.
Like I did the New York Times crossword puzzle with Jay Williams at Bristol over coffee lots of mornings. I think he frequently did it with different students who like to do the crossword puzzle. And I loved those, but there was nothing the least bit, untoward about that kind of thing. But, I guess in other contexts, sitting and having coffee with a professor at Bristol theoretically could have let them ask if you wanted to have dinner or even
it wasn't a closed door. You weren't like behind a closed door in his office or in his home, or he was out in public.
Okay.
No, but I did go to the home of the Rabinowitzes for special assistant with an application. Bill Salzillo lived in the dorms and welcomed people to come and drop by his house with his family. He had a child and a wife. I mean, that was there was an overlap that I think was actually quite healthy and quite special.
I had an independent study with a Hamilton professor my senior year, and I grew to have kind of a crush on him that I would never, I don't think I showed. I hope I didn't show. And then he had been talking to me about what I hope to do after graduation, which is another topic that's pretty hilarious often for Kirkland women because we had no plans often. And
more generational.
And I think far more than the Hamilton men, though, I think Kirkland women were a little bit not ones to plan their futures.
Well,
But
we didn't
anyway, so he's
Opportunity
been
for
talking to me about that, and did I want to go to grad school, and trying to. This was a good conversation, and so I went and thought about it for a week, and then when I saw him the next time for my weekly independent study thing, I had decided I was going to ask for a recommendation for grad school in case I decided to go. But I was really nervous to ask about it. And so I said, well, I have a question. And I was clearly probably really, really nervous. And his response was, what kind of question is this? Should I lock the door and pull down the blinds?
Oh my God.
What? Of course, you
that's
realize I did sort of have a crush on him. So part of me was saying, that's not a bad idea. And then,
but not really.
fortunately, what came out was, no.
That wouldn't even be funny to me. Like, that would be hair raising.
Well, what's interesting is then when I went back for my next meeting, I thought, well, what is going to happen this time? And he was totally not there. And
What do you mean not there? Like, wasn't
I mean, like playing it really
Detached?
straight. Okay, how was that reading that you did? And what about this recommendation? It was all very
They
professional.
probably got close to a situation, you know what I mean, without
I
even
think we
realizing.
both did a little bit. And
And then ran.
yeah, and which was good. But
Yeah.
it's like, oh my God, what have I gotten? What a weird thing to say.
But the other thing is, remember your age. I mean, I graduated at like 20 years old. So if I'm a 20-year-old, and if this professor is a whole mature 30 years old, and a lot of the Kirkland professors were young, that's a big difference in age and experience.
Right.
So
But he was married too. But
flirtation, but it was a flirtation of us.
Yeah.
There was, well, you dodged that one.
We both did, I think. I think he realized.
Wait a minute,
Don't
what
go
am I
there.
doing here? Yeah.
There were closed doors in those days, which there aren't really anymore. I mean, it's so difficult not to be surveilled. I mean, yes, of course there are closed doors, but I think my daughter's generation is much more transparent, because their just expectation is that somebody's going to tweet it or post it or
Interesting.
whatever.
So when a student goes to meet with their advisor, the door will usually be open. That's just the way it is.
You can ask a student now if they need to have the door closed, and then you're always a little nervous.
Yeah,
Well, this is the thing,
every
is that,
time I met with a
he said,
professor,
she
the
said,
door was
or
closed.
their word against yours, and so there's no evidence.
Well, that is, the testimony of the two parties is the evidence. And then it's, it's tough to salvage a reputation, professional reputation.
Mm.
And the professor has a lot more to lose, I think. In this.
Right.
And I think that was probably also true then, because I get the sense that old line Hamilton faculty didn't approve of young Kirkland faculty sort of constantly dating students, right? That most of them had come there with a spouse, right? That they had met as undergrads, and they were pretty settled, which is not to say that there were not Hamilton faculty who were enormously culpable in this way. But I do feel as though going up for tenure with a reputation for cutting a swath through the female students was not a plus.
Well put. Ay, ay, ay.
I'm thinking
But I
we
do
should
think,
have-
if I remember, the professor at Kirkland who was most notorious for this, I thought stayed on. Maybe I'm wrong.
You thought what?
The professor who I have read, and I didn't know it at the time, but was most notorious for dating Kirkland students, was still a professor, I thought, at Hamilton after Kirkland's demise.
If we're thinking about the same person, I don't think that lasted very long.
Oh,
I could name names.
let's just say, are we
I
talking
think I know
art
who you're talking
history?
about.
We could wait till you end the tape.
Yes, Carol,
and-
yeah, that didn't last long.
How did you feel about Kirkland as an institution? Was it a women's college to you? Was it a co-ed school? And maybe quickly, what did you take from Kirkland in the rest of your life?
I
Well,
felt
that one
it
is.
was a
Quick-
women's
quick Right of
college
that.
where you had the power, I thought, to control your own institution. But it truly was the best of both worlds because it was a co-ed social environment. But we had this wonderful Kirkland women's autonomy and educational innovation, which at the time, honestly, I probably valued the educational innovation even more than
It called
women's.
itself coordinate. It was coordinate. That's how I imagined it. It was separate admissions. It was like Barnard, separate admissions, cross registration, or you didn't have to cross register. So that's what you're saying, right, Carol?
yes.
Yeah, and to me, it didn't, I wasn't there, I wasn't at Kirkland because it was a women's college. But, and you know what, if we had if Kirkland had been co-ed, you know, that would have been fine too. But I didn't go there because it was a women's college. And in fact, as I said, it was the co-ed. I wanted men around. Interestingly, like Joanne Rappaport was like, oh, she takes away from it. Her takeaway was she likes a women's college. And when her daughter was applying to schools, she encouraged her to go to a women's college. And that was so many years later. But it just wasn't my sense of Kirkland. But no, and what did I take away from Kirkland for my entire life? An open-mindedness, a curiosity, a lack of, things didn't have to be in rigid categories, like not wanting life to be in rigid categories, and an openness towards the world, towards what you do, towards all sorts of people, whatever you are doing with your life, and a perpetual creativity and artistic endeavors always seemed more important. You know, I was in the dance studio and in List in the art studios, you know, like biology only lasted 1 year, and the rest of it, I had to have my art class, whatever it was. I had to have my dance class. I had to order a bunch of other dance. Oh yeah. And there was literature, but, and wanting always all these things to be part of my life. It's hard to sum up, but
I totally agree with everything Tammy said. I was not, and still I'm not, an artist myself in any form, but I think I must have known I appreciated it somehow. And I did take some photography classes and a couple of film classes. And to this day, I just love being around creative people. And I think I might not have been like that without Kirkland, though it was. But one thing I loved was that it was that there were no rules. I mean, again, that kind of goes with the sign of the times, but I love that, you know, I knew I wanted to be an Asian studies major. I was always a very interdisciplinary type of person, and I could do anthro and religion and history and government and all these things. And I thrived off that, and nobody was going to tell me I had to take an economics class or whatever a biology class. And Doug Raybeck, my advisor, did several times try to encourage me to broaden myself a little bit. And I was like, no. And one of the things I said to him in recent years, when I met him again at reunions, I said, you know, as I got older, funny thing was, I was like, I think I want to take this computer science class. I want to take this economics class. I work in a field completely unrelated to my major. But I just loved having that freedom. And I did fail at some things. I completely bungled the winter study that I designed and then basically didn't do. And always felt some guilt about it until I realized
How can you
that
bungle
was
winter
such a
study?
good experience to learn. And I realized how much I had used it in my life. But the one thing I've often wondered about is the whole chicken and the egg thing. Did Kirkland attract lifelong learners, people who wanted, you know, to be creative and thrive and go in different directions and wanted to have a life where it wasn't a set routine? Or did it make us into those people?
No.
I would say it made us into those people because I was not one and I became one.
Became one
I think I was partially one.
An adventurous, self-determining, fearless. People call me fearless and confident. That is not how I went. It's not how I went into Kirkland. Sorry.
You probably were that person, like I think we all were, and we were identifying, but only in a partially conscious way. And we knew enough intuitively to surround ourselves with educators who are underneath us. I'm giving you credit.
No, Pam, I was a popular dumb blonde.
Why did you want Kirkland?
Never thought that about you.
I wanted to go to Kirkland because I totally admired my cousin Sandy Faison, who was in the charter class. Oh. And it was frankly, it was a safety for my college. I mean, my high school, everybody who applied got in. Huh. So I had women in my class who were angry at me because I didn't go to Connecticut College and other places that they had gotten into. I got into Colorado College and some of them had not gotten in. And so they were pissed off at me for taking a spot they might have gotten if I hadn't, or whatever their thinking was.
Yeah, anyway. I mean, I was so anti-prestigious schools that was a little bit of an issue with me too, although sort of in the reverse, people were so happy that I wanted Kirkland because there were people below me in class rank who got into Ivy League colleges, and they're like, that's because Carolyn didn't apply. But, you know, I think there was a lot of self-selection for Kirkland.
Yeah, Sarah Lawrence too, yeah.
Well, and I think the admissions office looked for people who could handle it, you know, who would thrive at Kirkland, who showed that they had the ability to function without a lot of rules. So
yeah, and apparently some women did not do so well.
But
yeah.
See, and I don't think I went in that because I came from a Queens high school. And I didn't know. It's like no rules. Oh yeah, that sounds good. But I didn't know how I would do there, you know. It's but maybe you're right. Maybe it just encouraged that development of that in once you were there.
It fostered that tendency that you might have had.
Or
Or that
if somebody says to you, well, what do you think?
Mm.
You actually have to look and say, yeah, what do I think? You know?
And Carolyn, don't you think, I mean, you said you sort of blew your winter study, right? Your J-term thing that, but don't you think that women particularly did not get a chance to feel safe to fail when we were growing up? And that there's nothing more educational than screwing up.
I totally believe the second part. At the time, at least, I feel like that the Hamilton men I've talked to about this issue felt a much stronger need to succeed academically. And they were terrified because I think for a lot of them, Hamilton was very difficult. And
Yes.
they were constantly being worried about not getting their grades at a good enough level, or would they get put on probation. And some of the faculty were known for just tearing people apart. And when I told this story about this winter study on a phone call, we did one of our hangouts for our class, and what I had said is I was going to read X number of books, these different books on these different revolutionary leaders in different parts of the globe, and sort of compare and contrast their leadership and their revolution. Yeah, winter study was like 3 weeks long. Was I really going to read 4 books about Mao and Che Guevara and whoever else? No. And the Hamilton students were like, how'd you get that proposal signed? We would have had to write a 30-page paper and do this and do that. And I'm like, I don't know. Somebody signed it, I guess. I didn't even really notice. And then at the end, I wrote a summary, like a 2-page summary of what I did. And I kind of insinuated I did like 300% more than I did. But I also admitted I'd done not that much. And I wrote all this stuff about how it was a great learning experience, about how to design a project. And it was total BS. And I think I always felt really guilty about it. And then later in my career, I was working with a staff member of mine and trying to help him design a project that he was going to be the lead on. And as I'm talking about it, I suddenly hit myself and said, oh my God, Carolyn, you're still, that stuff you learned from that stupid winter study that you feel so guilty about.
Yeah.
And the other thing I did is every other winter study, I made sure it was that it was not dependent on me to pull it off. It's like, I did student teaching in a school, or, a couple of other things I did, but they were very defined.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So I think I learned a whole lot.
Amazing.
But you couldn't do that at most schools.
I think I got the most out of that horrible diatribe non-recommendation letter, because I learned who I wasn't and who I didn't want to be. And I've carried that experience with me my entire life. And when it cycled back to me at that reunion, I said to my husband the other day, I said, I think I have another letter I want to write to that professor. I actually want to, in a screwed up way, thank him, because I did take control of my education after that. It was a real wake-up call, a real shock and traumatic. And by the time I got to Sarah Lawrence and I got to the Sarah Lawrence interview, which I told everyone the other night, Sam totally supported, as my advisor, and I'd gone to see him, we discussed it. And I was on a mission. I was a terror in the classes and a terror in graduate school, which was later in my 30s at Columbia, because I did read every book. I was the nerd who read every book and wrote insane logs and, paper, but that was for me. That wasn't to be better than anyone else. So like you're talking about your winter study experience, you're not really coming from a place of failure. You're coming from a place of self-awareness. And,
Yes.
it's an amazing thing. And so,
But like
you
Elizabeth
want
said,
failure to be a positive for your kids, but and having now taught for 40 years, and these kids are just so smothered by the helicopter parents who are people I taught, and they're so terrified to fail, and everything's for college or for the resume building. And I just, and when my Hamilton friends were like, what you were talking about, like, I don't know how I got this thing signed. And all your guy friends are like, how'd you get that thing signed? And I remember saying to Scotty Klein, how do you know you want to go to law school? He goes, I don't want to, I have to. I go, what? And then he got to law school and he ended up dropping out because he realized, maybe we were lucky. We didn't have.
And then you got
pressures.
Tammy, who was a
We were
dance
lucky.
major. And then after realizing dance just wasn't gonna be a viable adult path, said, I guess I'll
And I
go
went
to
to law school. But if I had thought I had to do it straight through, it never would have worked for me. So yeah, I that was again a Kirkland thing. You try, and it was also an economic possibility then. I mean, I had an apartment in New York that I shared with someone, and it was under $150 a month. So if I had to choose, yeah. So, and you can't do that now,
Did you have your grades translated for law school?
I did. Actually, that was the reason I applied to law school, as I said, oh, well, Kirkland, little did I know how long will it last, but I was thinking it would be a good idea to apply to some schools so that my grades would get transferred over. And then whatever I wanted to do down the road, I'd be able to do it. So I put in applications for law school just for the hell of it. I wasn't even 50% committed to going. I was kind of, if I'm not doing something else that's interesting, I'll go. But it was one of the thoughts I had was get the grades translated over.
I
And
think
then-
that was their problem.
I
Well,
forgot the story, Tammy, but didn't your parents say, we're going to pay for this, but
Yeah.
if you
Well, what they did is they told me I had to take out a loan, and they would pay back the loan if I graduated. So when I got on law review, I said, okay, I think I want a trip somewhere. I mean, I got money out of them. I don't remember if that was, I don't know, whatever it was, I somehow, they got them to subsidize a trip. And, it's like, hey, you didn't even think I was going to graduate. So.
and here's been a successful attorney for decades.
Right.
Well, 3 of my Hamilton guy friends were from Queens, Tammy, and they all had full scholarships. So that's, like Kirkland didn't have an endowment, and that was a lot of, I think, what the fight was.